In the 2022nd year of this age, I found myself aboard a train traveling from Oslo, Norway to Stockholm, Sweden. In my hands I held a tome inspired by the landscapes and mythologies passing by the window. The Lord of the Rings, Return of the King was its name, and the chapter I turned to was titled The Pyre of Denethor. It is here that I discovered something that I did not expect, something not found in the visual telling of the tale. Something sharp with black shadows, noble, proud, and terrible. Something that in the Nordic sun I knew I would never forget. Something that showed me how the will of the enemy was able to enter into the very heart of this city called the West.
Ladies and gentlemen, dudes and dudettes, witches, wizards, and mystical muggles alike, this is Defense Against the Dark Arts, and I am your professor, Dude, the Wise. But please, just call me Dude. Denethor, the Steward of Gondor, is portrayed in the third Lord of the Rings film as an old, pompous, fuming fool whom you do not want to have supper with. While John Noble's portrayal of the character works for the movie, it does not do justice to the steward as he is portrayed in the book. Denethor on the page is a formidably intelligent authority and no stranger to wisdom. He is not a gluttonous excuse for a man, but a towering figure to be taken seriously. Pippin is reminded of Aragorn the first time he sees the steward's face, and in the words of Tolkien, Denethor looked indeed much more like a great wizard than Gandalf did, more kingly, beautiful, and powerful. And yet, he suffers the same fate as the tomato-popping poop face in the film. How can this be so? To answer that question, we must dive into the fiery text of the Pyre of Denethor itself, and discover the method with which Sauron deceived the steward, and deceives us all. The chapter opens with ominous tension. Pippin pleads with Gandalf to save Faramir, brother of the late Boromir, from being burnt alive by their despairing father, Denethor. Denethor has gone to the tombs, said Pippin, and he has taken Faramir, and he says we are all to burn, and he will not wait, and they are to make a pyre and burn him on it, and Faramir as well, and he has sent men to fetch wood and oil. Through chaos and foreboding obstacles, Gandalf and Pippin finally confront Denethor in his woe. As Tolkien tells it, and this is Gandalf speaking first, "Where is your son, Faramir?" "He lies within," said Denethor. "Burning, already burning. They have set a fire in his flesh, but soon all shall be burned. The West has failed. It shall all go up in a great fire, and all shall be ended. Ash! Ash and smoke blown away on the wind." What struck me about this statement when I studied it on the train years ago was that it didn't sound queer at all. The underlying sentiment has been expressed at some time or another by nearly everyone I've encountered in the past 5 years, including myself. Why? Why is it that so many of us, like Denethor, look at the future and see only shadow and flame? Why have so many chosen suicide as a way to deal with this future? And why does it seem inevitable that so many more, perhaps Western civilization itself, will choose this fate also? Back to the tale. Moving with furious concern, Gandalf and Pippin storm past Denethor, only to find that while Faramir's flesh is drenched with oil on a table surrounded by wood ready to burn, no flames have yet torched his flesh. Seeing this, Gandalf leaps upon the table, lifts the limp but still living body of Faramir, and carries him away to a safer place to lie. And here, my dear friends, is where Denethor unveils his secret. After a short outburst of fatherly compassion and longing for his son, Denethor returns to his madness, never to abandon it again. Tolkien writes, "Come," said Gandalf, "we are needed. There is much that you can yet do." Then suddenly Denethor laughed. He stood up tall and proud again, and stepping swiftly back to the table, he lifted from it the pillow on which his head had lain. Then coming to the doorway, he drew aside the covering, and lo, he had between his hands a palantir. "Pride and despair!" he cried. "Didst thou think that the eyes of the White Tower were blind? Nay, I have seen more than thou knowest, grey fool, for thy hope is but ignorance. Go then and labour in healing, go forth and fight. Vanity! For a little space you may triumph on the field, for a day, but against the power that now arises there is no victory. To this city only the first finger of its hand has yet been stretched. All the east is moving, and even now the wind of thy hope cheats thee, and wafts up Anduin a fleet with black sails. The west has failed. It is time for all to depart who would not be slaves. Such counsels will make the enemy's victory certain indeed," said Gandalf. In Peter Jackson's motion picture trilogy, the Palantir is featured powerfully. We're given an idea of how it works in the scene where Saruman betrays Gandalf, and in the scene where Pippin, like a tookish porn addict, can't help but take a look. But unfortunately, Denethor's relationship with his secret seeing stone is not sufficiently explored in the Return of the King film. There are winks to the secret, but no great reveal, like in the passages just read. This is a pity, because Tolkien explores the dementing power of the Palantir in more depth when writing about Denethor than perhaps any other character in Middle-earth. And the truths he identifies are, in my view, the most profound in the entire saga, and absolutely essential to understand for those living in the 2025th year of this age. You see, the primary function of a palantir is to allow seers to communicate across vast distances with other palantirs and to perceive images and visions of what is happening elsewhere in the world. Memories of the past and thoughts of the seers can also be exchanged. They are not evil objects in and of themselves, but can be used for evil and manipulative purposes nonetheless. They do not, for instance, grant the seer the ability to know the future, but a skilled manipulator in possession of a palantir could convince a weaker seer of precisely this delusion. This is the sleight of hand trick Sauron plays throughout The Lord of the Rings, for he possessed one of the lost palantirs, and with it managed to cause Saruman the Wise to
abandon reason for madness.
He convinced him that
Against the power of Mordor, there can be no victory.
And this is precisely the same trick he pulled on Denethor, but with a more directly fatal effect. Returning to the previously quoted passage, it is clear how the steward became certain of a damned future. He describes true visions shown to him in the Palantir of the east moving and of a fleet of black sails approaching. These scenes of horror in the stone, combined with the death of his son Boromir, distorted his perceptions and are what ultimately led to his unshakable belief that the West would fail. Little did he realize that in his lonely hours, gazing into the abyss also gazed into him, learning how to corrupt his heart and drive him mad. He failed to distrust his fears. And so, when the enemy showed him visions of ships with black sails, he took this knowledge at face value, never considering the possibility that friends, not foes, could be manning those ships. Marcus Aurelius, a great wizard born early in our age, once said, "Pride is a master of deception." Terence McKenna, a less grand but still compelling wizard born late in our age, said, "Worry is praying to the devil." I mention these powerful words to make the point that Denethor was bewitched by pride and worry, the enemy's most seductive assassins. The disparate and dreadful images the palantir thrust upon his conscience gave him an enormous amount of material to worry about. And in the embrace of the anxiety produced by these fragments of knowledge, the steward's pride seduced him into believing that he knew how all these fragments connected and what they would lead to. And so Sauron's trick was accomplished. Denethor concluded that he knew the future. And in the case of movie Denethor, although some of the following words also relate to book Denethor, he concluded this long before Faramir was wounded, before Gondor was besieged, before the hour was late, when he could have done something. But since, in his despondency, he did nothing, he made certain that Faramir would be wounded, that Gondor would be besieged, and that the hour would no longer be early. By failing to act, he chose to make his fears of the future true. He chose to be burned like the heathen kings of old. He chose the fires of Mount Doom to follow his own counsel, and in the words of the Grey Fool, make the enemy's victory a certain indeed.
It is the Lord Denethor predicted. Long has he foreseen this doom. Foreseen and done nothing.
All this and more can be said of us. Many compare Western civilization to a cut flower, beautiful for the present moment, but after a few more revolutions around the sun, will wilt and die. It is said that the oldest forests are no more, and the ones that still stand shall fall to the axes and flames of our industry. It's only a matter of time, and the hourglass is empty, for
the flames of war
are upon us. All the East is moving. Two peoples exchange hellfire in the land of milk and honey, whilst the armies of white, blue, and red make blood with the armies of blue and gold. Soon all shall be burned and all shall be ended. Why marry and raise children if this is what they shall inherit? A world of ugliness, injustice, suffering, and decay. It is time for all to depart who would not be slaves, is how the palantirs in our pockets make us feel. In the heart of our stronghold, the enemy has power to strike us. You see, the primary function of a smartphone is to allow users to communicate across vast distances with other devices and to perceive images and visions of what is happening elsewhere in the world. Memories of the past and thoughts of the users can also be exchanged. Hold on a minute, I gotta shoot this text. They are not evil objects in and of themselves, but they can be used for evil and manipulative purposes nonetheless. They do not, for instance, grant the user the ability to know the future, but a skilled manipulator or inhuman algorithm could convince a weaker user of precisely this delusion. This is the trick Sauron has pulled on us all. For years we have gazed into the black glass of our palantirs, not realizing that that's what they are. And for years our hope has waned. The problems we've glimpsed have appeared too big, the people too delusional, the darkness too widespread. And so our will to act has been diminished, and in the case of some, vanished altogether. We have been seduced into believing that we know the future, and are, like Denethor, making the enemy's victory certain indeed. Reading Gandalf. So long has the reach of our enemy become, alas, but now I perceive how his will was able to enter into the very heart of the city. Though the stewards deemed that it was a secret kept only by themselves, long ago I guessed that here in the White Tower one of the 7 seeing stones was preserved. In the days of his wisdom, Denethor did not presume to use it, nor to challenge Sauron, knowing the limits of his own strength. But his wisdom failed, and I fear that as the peril of his realm grew, he looked in the stone and was deceived. Far too often, I guess, since Boromir departed. He was too great to be subdued to the will of the Dark Power, he saw nonetheless only those things which that power permitted him to see. The knowledge which he obtained was, doubtless, often of service to him. Yet the vision of the great might of Mordor that was shown to him fed the despair of his heart until it overthrew his mind. Algorithms and the dark profit-seeking, chaos-inducing power that informs the values and intentions of at least a portion of their engineers have frequently only shown us those things that feed our despair. The knowledge which we have obtained has, doubtless, often been of service to us. Yet the vision of the great might of evil that has been shown through our screens has overthrown many of our minds. But alas, the Luddite solution of casting our palantiric technology into the fires of Mount Doom, I'm afraid, will not solve this problem. For the mind can overthrow itself. It is the palantir we all possess, and cannot help but gaze into. Pride and worry can do wondrously monstrous work solely with the information in your skull, derived from natural experience. Sauron can deceive you with nothing but you. There is, then, it would appear, no escape from the palantir. But do not lose heart, friends, for this is defense against the dark arts, after all. And so while there is no way to rid the world of its palantirs, neither the ones in pockets or skulls, there are ways of dealing with them that I believe, if practiced, will help save the West from the age of Orc. The first of these ways is to accept that we have responsibilities that must be fulfilled, not abdicated. Denethor's death, as it is told in the text, sheds light on this maxim. "Come hither," he cried to his servants. "Come, if you are not all recreant." Then 2 of them ran up the steps to him. Swiftly he snatched a torch from the hand of one and sprang back into the house. Before Gandalf could hinder him, he thrust the brand amid the fuel, and at once it crackled and roared into flame. Then Denethor leaped upon the table, and standing there wreathed in fire and smoke, he took up the staff of his stewardship that lay at his feet, and broke it on his knee. Casting the pieces into the blaze, he bowed and laid himself on the table, clasping the palantir with both hands upon his breast. And it was said that ever after, if any man looked in that stone, unless he had a great strength of will to turn it to other purpose, he saw only 2 aged hands withering in flame. For Denethor, losing all hope was freedom. Freedom from taking responsibility for his own life, his son Faramir's life, and for his city's life. The breaking and burning of his staff of stewardship is a symbolic representation of just this. While there is much in this world that is out of our control, we all have a staff of stewardship to wield, not waste in a blaze. Most of us have friends and family members to look after and protect, and those of us who do not can find them, or at the very least, find peace in our loneliness, by being good stewards of our solitary souls, a triumph as damaging to the enemy as any other. And then there are those who have a calling to solve starvation, poverty, illness, or to write a book, direct a movie, or build something that brings benefit to others. Some are called to save the Ents and wilds of the world. For years, the conservationist Paul Rosalie gazed into the palantir of doomsday environmentalism. Now, he has successfully protected large swaths of the majesty surrounding the Las Piedras River in the Amazon. He has given former loggers jobs to protect the forest, jungle keepers they are named, and has built the coolest treehouse on Earth to give visitors an experience that will teach them to be stewards of the jungle too. Will he and the rest of us succeed in our worthy goals when the forces arrayed against us are so terribly strong? That I cannot answer, but I can say, in the words of the hardest man of our age, that the only way to guarantee failure is to quit right now, Breaking our staffs of stewardship will not give us freedom, but enslave us to doom. And so instead of screaming, "Abandon your post! Please flee for your life!" in the wake of what our palantirs have shown us, the defense against the dark arts lesson here is that we should instead
prepare for battle!
If the spirit in your heart has not been moved by any of what I have said thus far, and you still feel that,
We cannot defeat the armies of Mordor.
because things are just too far gone to even bother hoping, much less trying, then I'm afraid I'm going to have to talk to you about cannibalism. In the book and film titled The Road, a global cataclysm has blotted out the sun with ash for years. The story does not reveal whether it was a supervolcanic eruption, asteroid impact, or nuclear war that caused it. All that we are told is that in the years following the event, the plants have died and most of the animals too. The still dominant species, humans, have largely become beasts who prey on the flesh of other humans for lack of non-human life to consume. The man and the boy, our main characters who are never named in the story, walk along a road towards the ocean. They are some of the few decent people who have not been eaten or committed suicide out of fear of being eaten. In their post-apocalyptic world, losing all hope and putting a bullet in one's brain is presented as an honestly defensible option, and yet neither the man or the boy ever do. They instead continue walking down the road, carrying with them the belief that there is still good in the world and in humanity, good worth living for. They refer to this belief as carrying the fire. I bring all this up to point out the often overlooked fact that humanity has gone through catastrophes in the distant past, not unlike the one depicted in The Road, and survived. We did not give up, even though we really did have every excuse at our disposal. No, instead a remnant carried the fire until the clouds parted and the sun lit the world again. Those alive today are not experiencing the apocalypse in The Road, or any of the apocalypses that have come before us. The sun shines every day. The hour may no longer be early, but it is not too late. Gondor is still Gondor. And so, while it is not certain that we can defeat the armies of Mordor, it would be better for us to
Meet them in battle nonetheless.
For now is the time when we can do something for our families, communities, countries, and still beautiful world. Now is the time to light the beacons. Branching out from the books and films we've been discussing, I have a confession to make. And by I mean the man of many men, Carter Brown. Up until very recently, I bought palantirs for a living. I worked in a cubicle buying used cell phones and tablets over the phone from businesses, nonprofits, municipalities, and other organizations. I worked this job for over half a year, and the lessons I learned from this experience have been invaluable to me, and I suspect they will be beneficial to you also. Before sharing them with you though, a few things need to be stated up front. I do not want anyone who worked at this company, if they're watching, to come away from this video thinking that I disliked them or the company itself. My coworkers were honestly inspiring to work with, my bosses were gracious, and the pay was great. The company culture was legitimately unique and incredibly positive. With all that being said, I absolutely hated making the phone calls. And so when we would sing the "If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands" song every morning to start our company meetings, it must be admitted that while I clapped every day, I was never happy.
If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands.
Every morning I wake at the bottom of a well. Every day I climb with fingers bleeding, heart sinking, till I catch the last rays of sun, head peaking, above the lip of despair, only to fall sleeping without care, into the shadows, into the night, to wake once more, gazing at daylight. Another climb away, so far away.
Yes, good morning. This is Carter Brown. I'm calling trying to get a hold of...
Tear-stained cheeks in the metal box at night, and all day in the lights. The shadows are just too bright. My life, my life. Oh, what is my life? The stranger in the mirror, the tomb of a dying soul, is almost queerer than a sun made out of coal. Memories of a boy who was not so sad, not so mad, not so unfamiliar as the stranger in the mirror.
I'm just calling to let you know that I don't think I'm going to be able to make it into work today.
Calling in to not call out to strangers who hate to hear my pleading voice of strangled doubt. So at home, I sleep from fear. In the temple of suffering, in the cubicle of new opportunities, I sit quietly buffering at my database of future importunities. In the temple of suffering, I quake with uncertainties. Surviving or dying, I ask the mirror crying. On paper I am thriving, but my eyes see only lying.
If you know your party's extension, you may dial it at any time. To hear this message again, press 8.
When the impossible is done, the unthinkable must come. You're a wild son. Escape your cubicle slum.
The person at extension 1247 is unavailable.
But to where goes future's stare?
To leave a message,
Jump the nest, forget the rest.
recording. Press pound for more options. Record at the tone.
The poems just read were written over the course of my time working in the call center and played a major role in my mental and emotional survival there. We were required to make 200 plus calls for 240 plus minutes of recorded phone time daily, while also answering emails and trying to buy 1,000 phones per month. Music was played non-stop on the buying floor, and it was largely not my kind of music. These are the facts that contextualize that poem about waking at the bottom of a well with a soul-crushing, stranger-bothering climb above me every day. And as you can tell from the tone of the other poems, I never found a way to enjoy these tasks. But I did find several ways to deal with the mountain of anxiety produced by them. So building off the back of the dude's discussion on Denethor and the Palantir, let's now talk about Inside Out 2, and all of the experiences and information that helped me see through anxiety's palantiric projections whilst suffering in my cubicle. The poem that goes, tear-stained cheeks in the metal box at night, and all day in the lights, the shadows are just too bright. My life, oh, what is my life? Was written after only making phone calls for 2 weeks and is actually, chronologically, the first call center poem I wrote. And I should add that before this job, I had worked as a door-to-door salesman for 6 months and had quit that job thinking that this one wouldn't wear me out as much. I could not have been more wrong, and this poem accurately expresses the shock and suffocating nature of this realization. I had graduated with a college degree years previously, had traveled extensively, had been cast in TV shows and movies, and yet I was stuck in a cubicle alone, living alone, was single, and was not at all where my younger self imagined I would be at the age of 25. After the first week on the job, I remember whispering to myself while looking around at the fluorescently lit buying floor with ears hurting and body aching that this is hell. While eating a fat burrito with friends on my first weekend off, I remember telling them that sitting in my cubicle and facing my database of cold calls was like kissing an electronic Denethor. By the end of the day, my soul was sucked out of my body. When I thought of the future, I was certain that I would not only fail the job, but that I would also fail at my creative pursuits, because I just wasn't good enough, and the world with all its chaos wouldn't let me. Although I never spoke the words, my attitude was that all would be ash and smoke blown away on the wind. I recount all this to illustrate that anxiety was driving my consciousness. And as Inside Out 2 shows, when anxiety drives, your self gets launched to the back of the mind.
You bottle up your emotions and freak out about finding your new sense of self. In those first 2 weeks at the call center, myself had been launched to the back of my mind, and I was freaking out about who I was and who I should become. Even though I described them to friends, my emotions were bottled up, and that I did not let them physically show. Until I cried and wrote this poem alone in my trailer. In my childhood and college years, poetry had never been of much interest to me. I didn't get it. But then I got out of college, got depressed, and now I get it. Poetry is often described as the language of the soul, and in the teary night of my soul, writing this first poem about the pain I was going through had a lightening effect, because I had taken the emotions that were weighing me down and put them on paper outside of my tortured consciousness. This allowed me to look at my emotions with my actual eyes instead of my inner possessed eye, and process what I was going through. I think poetry, more so than other forms of writing, can be a great defense against the dark arts of psychological pain and delusion, because poems have the ability to contain strong emotions in a very short and compact format. This makes the beneficial catharsis that can be experienced with journaling and other forms of writing more quickly accessible, digestible, and memorable, especially if they rhyme. But poetry is not a cure-all for me, and possibly not a cure at all for some of you who just don't like it in general, or because of its association with people who drink tea all day, thinking they are more sophisticated than everyone. Yes. Peasants. Sometimes issues caused by anxiety need to be parsed out in a longer, less flowery format. This brings me to my loneliness journal. Dwayne Knoll, or as I call him, Cowboy Gandalf, of the YouTube channel Dry Creek Wrangler School, made a video called How to Deal with Loneliness, where he spoke extensively about how people who are single or who lack friends can deal with loneliness without getting swamped by it. The following words inspired me to create this journal, which we will delve into afterwards.
The one companion that's always going to be with you is yourself. And the reason why we cannot face the concept of not having any companion is because we're not comfortable with ourselves as a companion. We don't want to be left alone by ourselves with ourselves. So we come in and we sit down and we get on our phone, or we turn on the TV, or we go wherever, we do whatever, because we don't want to face the reality of being by ourselves with ourselves. Start making yourself a companion that you're comfortable with. If you're with yourself and yourself is always beating you up, you're not going to want to be with yourself. If I'm sitting out here by myself in the evening by a fire, cup of coffee and a cigar, and I'm constantly beating myself up over my failures in the past, I'm not someone that I want to be alone with. You want someone who's going to encourage you, who sees the possibility in the future, who gently pushes me and encourages me to get out of the rut, to get out of the hole, to get out of the sheepfold, to get out of the swamp that I'm in, and to move on and do better. Well, if you don't have somebody who's going to do that, become that somebody.
For me, my internal dialogue is negatively inclined. When I'm walking around just going through life, it's much easier for me to listen to anxiety as opposed to joy. And so when I came across the advice just played, I knew I needed to follow it. Not just by saying positive things to myself, but by writing those positive things down in detail, so that my internal dialogue could have substantial grounding outside of my ever-racing stream of consciousness. And so I bought a journal with the intent to always write a positive and hopeful interpretation of whatever was going on in my life. I started making entries anytime I felt bad about myself, something that had happened, something that I feared could happen, or when I just wanted to pause and reflect on the genuinely good things about me. I still write entries to this day, because while this journaling practice has not completely transformed me from a pessimist into an optimist, it has balanced things out significantly. I'm still lonely a lot of the time, but by being a good companion to myself in this way, my anxiety-ridden false self that says that I'm crap and have a future of crap lacks the monopoly on my mind that it used to have. When faced with pages of positivity, it's forced to lower its volume. Here's an example entry. Last day of the year. 2024 was the most difficult year of my life. Painful, depressing, but also strengthening, enlightening, and inspiring. In 2025, I will be bold by relaxing. I thank God for everything this year. I've certainly become a more defined individual as a result. In 2025, this trend will continue, and so much more will come to pass. I'm excited. It's cliche but true. Much of our lives are determined by what we tell ourselves. Jumping back Inside Out 2, this is beautifully illustrated when joy and sadness visit the belief system of Riley. When joy pulls on the strings of the system, positive beliefs about Riley are said.
I'm strong. I'm a really good friend.
These beliefs form Riley's sense of self and shape her internal dialogue, making her a truly positive person at this time in the film. When Riley develops anxiety, however, the phrasing and contents of her inner dialogue change, and she develops false beliefs that form a false self. When anxiety pulls on the strings of her belief system, they only say things like,
If I'm good at hockey, I'll have friends.
Which is false. Hockey is awesome, being good at it is cool, but it is not what would make people like Riley on its own. After being filled with all these false beliefs, Riley's statement of identity goes from,
I'm a good person,
to,
I'm not good enough.
And the experience of her life goes from positive to negative. That's what happens when you're not a good companion to you. For me, I am most vulnerable to anxiety when I'm alone. The loneliness journal technique I've laid out has helped make sure that my true self, who I really am, speaks and is closer to the front of my mind instead of at the back. Adopting this technique is something worth considering, but honestly, the best way to fully learn that the projections of anxiety are untrustworthy is to watch them not happen. This brings me to my nightmare. The 240-minute minimum was the most maddening aspect of the call center job. 4 hours of recorded minutes may not seem like a lot of time, but when you take into account that most people don't pick up the phone when you call them, and that the voicemails you leave typically don't factor into your daily minutes, then 4 hours takes 9 hours of calling with very few breaks. It was exhausting, and in the first 4 months on the job, I got into the habit of not hanging up the phone when I was put on hold for a long time, just to help me get my minutes before the bell rang. I'd read quotes from different authors and shop on Etsy. In other words, I'd slack off a couple times a day. Well, one day I slacked off more than once or twice, and when I say that, I mean like 7 times. I knew that what I was doing was wrong, and that night my guilt spoke through this embarrassingly paranoid dream, which I embarrassingly made a voice recording of at 3 a.m. in the morning. You have permission to laugh at me.
I dreamt that I was at work, and I heard shouting as he approached my cubicle, Carter! Carter! And then he entered my cubicle and handed me like verse cards, like the ones that I use with Dad. But they weren't, they didn't have the exact same verses on them as I usually read. I only read one of them, and I don't exactly remember the wording of it, but the sentiment expressed by the card was, behold the truth of your circumstance. And then said to me, we've been tracking your Z minutes, and while your I minutes are still up enough to keep you on, you've got 4 more days to meet your goals, and that's it. And he said this kind of all very angrily and frustratedly, and then he walked away. And what that meant is that by Z minutes, the idea is that they have been tracking my 0 contact minutes, my minutes where I just sit there scrolling on Etsy and reading philosophy quotes. It means like that's what that was saying there. And as for the I minutes, I think that just meant regular good minutes. But yeah, spooky dream. I hope it's just a dream.
3 days later, not 4, one of my supervisors, not the one from the dream, asked to meet with me in the conference room. Even though the details were a bit off, I was preparing to be let go when I sat down with her because the dream had felt so convincingly dire. She then proceeded to tell me that a veteran employee was moving on from the company and that they needed their database to be worked by a focused buyer who knew what he was doing. She felt that I should inherit the database of established clients and offered it to me right there in the conference room. Containing my shock, I accepted and floated back to my cubicle. I wrote this in my loneliness journal that weekend. That paranoid dream I had turned out to be false, but I think it might have still been sent from God. The fact that it turned out to be baseless just taught me once again that I don't know the future and that so many of my imaginings of disaster will only ever take place inside my own head. Anxiety was the emotion in charge of my dreams that night, not joy, and certainly not truth. And yet, the truth of my circumstance was actually revealed to me. My worst enemy is my own perception. The next week, I was trained on my new database in my new cubicle by the veteran employee who was moving on. That's when I wrote the poem. In the temple of suffering, in the cubicle of new opportunities, I sit quietly buffering at my database of future importunities. In the temple of suffering, I quake with uncertainties. During that week, I learned how to get my minutes faster each day and a whole host of other things that I hadn't been taught. And over the next 2.5 months, the number of phones I bought skyrocketed without me having to cut corners to get my minutes. Anxiety's job is to protect us from the scary stuff we can't see. She plans for the future, has a lot of energy, and the cutest palantir with the cutest projections of everything that could go wrong. These projections can be useful to watch at times, just to keep you on your toes. But it's important to remember that this is ridiculous and
none of this will actually happen?
In the words of the hippie wizard Alan Watts, the function of the brain is to serve the present and the real, not to send man chasing wildly after the phantom of the future. None of the catastrophes I imagined or dreamed during my time working in the call center occurred. Living through this and watching projections of failure be superseded by realities of success has done more to help me see through the fog of my anxious 20s than anything. Patience, then, is perhaps the most effective tool I have found for dealing with anxiety. If you keep moving and don't give up, doing your best to keep your eyes focused on the present and the real, in time, almost all of what you fear will not come to pass. The cubicle scene from Inside Out Sue was my life for 7 months straight. Every morning before my shift, my mind workers sent up every possible thing that could go wrong. I was looking to the future. Every mistake I could make was projected on the screen of my mind as I drove through the darkness of my commute. I don't buy any phones today, and far from 1,000 this month. I don't get my 240 minutes by 4. I'm going to crack. I am going to explode. I'm going to hurt someone with my words. I'm going to be caught. I'm going to be fired. I used my imagination against me. I'm liked and respected now, but if I don't hit my numbers and make a poor decision or mistake, will they like and respect me tomorrow? Will I justifiably lose my job? When I got to work, this continued. But through the tools and techniques I've outlined, my daily projections of doom became less believable as the weeks and months ran on. One of my favorite Marcus Aurelius quotes that I read frequently goes like this: "Nothing but what you get from first impressions. That someone has insulted you, for instance. That, but not that it's done you any harm. The fact that my son is sick, that I can see. But that he might die of it, no. Stick with first impressions. Don't extrapolate, and nothing can happen to you. Or extrapolate from a knowledge of all that can happen in the world." This wisdom and Joy's example in the cubicle of drawing positive projections instead of only negative ones made projections of joy more numerous in my imagination land. I extrapolated into all the things that could go right more often. Or I didn't extrapolate at all, which was even better.
Candles of light grew brighter in the blackness, and even though anxiety sent the mind police on me till the end, speeches of joy were given in the recorded minutes of my cubicle life nonetheless. Sometimes hard to hear, but there. Anxiety had my mind workers chained at their desks, drawing nightmares. But more and more of them realized that they didn't have to take it anymore. They put their pencils down and many of their projections off on October 18th, 2024, the day I exited the Temple of Suffering, no longer an account rep. In the shadow of the Temple of Suffering, a young wizard strolls, no longer buffering, shunning his goals. In the shadow of the Temple of Suffering, a young wizard strolls no more. Cloaked in sunlight's covering, he carries wand to war. Is what I recite during the pillow fight of writing this project with no bi-weekly income. Anxiety still has influence in my turban, but has lost control of the mind inside it. For now I'm having fun with her by speaking of palantirs while dressed as Great Value Gandalf. This was not a part of her many-parted plan. Putting in my 2 weeks' notice went great, in spite of all her projections showing that it wouldn't. I've had checks arrive in the mail for money she never projected I would have. I'm surviving. And as long as we no longer fall for the temptation of Denethor, to commit a noble suicide that is ignoble everywhere but in our heads, America and Western civilization will survive too. This brings me back to the palantirs in our pockets, for we have spent the last several minutes treating the ones only in our skulls, and there is no more dangerous combination than to possess each at the same time, while not having defenses for both. If it weren't for smartphones, I would have very likely never come out of my shell. The iPhone has been an incredible vehicle for creativity, expression, and learning for me over the course of the past decade. But it is the fruit with the knowledge of good and evil that we've all taken bites out of that have not always been beneficial. We've become dependent on iPhones and smartphones, which are objects of great power, while not having been trained on how to protect ourselves from their ability to make us as ugly as Bilbo Baggins, or as shattered as ennui.
Oh la la, my phone? Where is my phone? Seriously? This is not happening. No, 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 no!
This oversight must be remedied, so I shall now share with you the tactics I've employed in my own life to make my smartphone serve me instead of the other way around. When I want to check the news, listen to compelling but anxiety-producing intellectuals, or learn about frightening subjects that I do not want the algorithm to feed me more information on after researching, I utilize incognito mode. Incognito mode is a setting that prevents your browsing activity from being saved to your device or to a Google account you're not signed into. This means that your browsing history, cookies, and site data are not saved, and your activity doesn't appear in your browser history. So, if I'm taking a peek on YouTube into the political insanity of our time, searching under incognito mode will prevent that sort of content from popping up in my regular non-incognito mode feed. This way, my actual YouTube recommendations remain populated with movie clips, animal videos, historical discussions, and of course, the wisdom of SpongeBob SquarePants. All things that will improve me and my outlook on life. I utilize incognito mode when searching for potentially triggering content on all websites, but YouTube is certainly my home site. So it's important that my feed is not filled with ominous material that would give my mind ammunition to paint a bleak future with. If your YouTube recommendations are already full of junk, another tactic to employ would be to tap on the 3 dots next to the videos you don't want to see more of and either select Not Interested or Don't Recommend Channel. If you do this consistently and hit refresh often, then your feed should clear up and be filled with all the kinds of content you do tap on and want to see. You bear responsibility for what you tap on and the consequences. As far as traditional social media is concerned, I do not have Facebook or Twitter. I may get a Facebook again to utilize it for actual social purposes in the future, but I will never get Twitter again. Both platforms seem to be breeding grounds for conflict, confusion, and stupidity, minus the good that can be easily accessed on YouTube, in my opinion. I recommend deleting social media that you are genuinely not finding much benefit from as a way to combat unhelpful influences in your life. I have found benefits from using Instagram, but it is a dangerous portal into delusion like any other app. The explore/search page can lead you to dark places indeed. but you can escape them by tapping the 3 dots next to a post you don't like and by selecting Not Interested, very similar to YouTube. I will say you have to do this on a lot of posts, while also interacting with a whole lot of other posts that you do want to see in order for your page to clear up, but it is achievable. The more insidious aspect of Instagram, however, is your main feed, with pictures and videos of your friends and family all having a far more fun life than you. Oh, loser. This is of course not true. But given that people typically like to post more positive things on Instagram than other social media sites, a person who is having a rough time can be deceived into thinking that they're a loser who is missing out on the quote-unquote good life. Your mind can be overthrown like Denethor's by positive fragments of information, just as much as negative ones. The best strategy I have found to combat this problem is to not have Instagram on my phone except when I need to post something. This way I walk through my days thinking of the good things in my own life instead of being jealous of the good things in other lives. If I do want to check my Instagram just to see what's up, I do so only on my laptop at home. There are the same dangers on the laptop as the phone, of course, but I have yet to find a way to fit my laptop in my pocket. By not having Instagram on my phone, its downsides are simply not accessible to me for the bulk of the day, and my outlook on life is better off for it. Speaking of laptops, I've alluded to this already, but I do want to explicitly say here that they, as well as smart TVs, etc., are palantirs too, for all these devices are connected to the internet. I focus on phones though because they really are the easiest to fall under the spell of. However, the following attitude sketched out by the theological wizard and friend of J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, applies to all the information-rich devices currently available to us. Lewis never possessed the devices we have today, but he did have access to newspapers in the early days of World War I, filled with information not good for a young lad's spirit. His attitude towards interacting with such information in his time, I believe, bears relevance to how young people like myself should interact with such information in our time. Reading Lewis. Accordingly, I put the war on one side to a degree which some people will think shameful and some incredible. Others will call it a flight from reality. I maintain that it was rather a treaty with reality, the fixing of a frontier. I said to my country, in effect, you shall have me on a certain date, not before. I will die in your wars if need be, but till then I shall have my own life. You may have my body, but not my mind. I will take part in your battles, but not read about them. Anxiety is at her most powerful in times of change. This is why our good gal Riley in Inside Out 2 has so much trouble, for she is going through puberty, the first inevitable plunge into change that all must go through, but not the last.
Well, that's a preview of the next 10 years.
Yes, periods of intense change can last a long time, even a decade, potentially more, and then they end. The tide comes back in, and we find peace for a term. But then someday we see something odd on the horizon, something we cannot escape. Something that makes us feel orange and frilly. My generation has been going through one of the longest periods of intense change in recent history with no end in sight. When I was a child, portable CD players were the rage. Now we have artificial intelligence and wars around the world being fought with drones. Much of this, like C.S. Lewis facing World War I, we cannot escape. But we can choose to focus on what is immediately relevant to us, instead of being attention slaves to external circumstances that are out of our hands. This is why I rarely check in on the news and occasionally engage in targeted media fasts. I love podcasts, but the sort of podcasts I typically listen to involve ladies and gentlemen flapping their tongues about whatever. This inevitably means that paranoid rants about the future of this or that subject come up in a garbled, wide-eyed manner that gives me a bunch of things to worry about that I really don't need to in my actual life. So I have now taken up the practice of going on month-long podcast fasts.
For me, this includes video interviews and all content discussing current events as well. I have found that my mind while listening to music, audiobooks, or watching great films during these fasts is less cluttered and more grounded than it is when consuming podcasts. I recommend implementing a practice of this sort in your own life, just to see how it goes. But whether you do or not, always remember that paying attention to all the world and its woes is impossible, and that shutting out the world for a minute is not a sin. Up until this point, the bulk of our discussion on anxiety has been negative, so I do think we should flip things over a bit, because anxiety, for all her cons, has terrific pros. Many of the most industrious and creative people to ever live had a wealth of anxiety. It was often a source of their power. They couldn't help but do the great things that they did because anxiety bugged them into sitting down or standing up to do their important work. Anxiety can produce a storm of ideas, a brainstorm, larger than perhaps any other emotion, which makes it great to have if you're an artist or just a person, so long as you keep it comfortable in the back seat, not driving the mind into an anxiety attack that paralyzes you instead of propelling you. You see, in the words of the lady philosopher who has only just got her socks on, we can listen to anxiety for anything practical, nothing projected. When anxiety is in her comfy chair, away from the control panel of Riley's headquarters at the end of Inside Out 2, she is in her proper place. She is the compelling backseat driver, watching out for what is directly in front of her human. The lesson here is that we cannot trust anxiety's projections of the future because they are not the future, for the future does not yet exist. But we can, like Riley, listen to anxiety's practical counsel to study for tomorrow's Spanish test tonight.
Olvidamos!
Always remember that anxiety's projections of ruin are dark fantasy, but not present reality. Again, in the words of Joy,
None of that is happening right now.
if you pray, the following words I hope will help you daily deal with the pesky, unsubstantiated, projected futures we've been discussing. I here present my Palantir prayer. Dear God, I am afraid of so many possible futures. I gaze daily into the Palantir, seeing snares and disasters tomorrow, next week, next month, and next year. I see other futures where things go well, but fear makes me see them as fantasies instead of legitimate possibilities. Lord, provide a way for me to lose my fear of what might happen. Give me the courage to trust you like a swimmer who trusts the water. Allow me to relax and float upon the torrents of this life, instead of clinging to them like a child. Lord, replace my fear with faith, so that I may not drown from worry, but swim with serenity. Amen. On one fortuitous day, whilst in my call center cubicle waiting for someone to pick up the phone, I clicked on a quote by the sage of Lebanon, Khalil Gibran, that has guided me ever since, and that I think will help guide us to the end of this video and beyond. Much of your pain is self-chosen. It is the bitter potion by which the physician within you heals your sick self. Therefore trust the physician, and drink his remedy in silence and tranquility. For his hand, though heavy and hard, is guided by the tender hand of the unseen, and the cup he brings, though it burn your lips, has been fashioned of the clay which the potter has moistened with his own sacred tears. Digesting this wisdom in my box under the fluorescent lights of the buying floor had a salutary effect. In the most mystical way, Khalil Gibran had let me know that I was not alone and that there was a way out, almost 100 years after his death. I understood that there was purpose in my monotonous, soul-crushing, overstimulating boredom, and that purpose was to taste the bitter potion of my self-chosen pain. No one forced me to be a telesalesman, and discover that I could not only keep it down till the following morning, but down another and another, so long as I trusted the physician's invisible handiwork to eventually heal me. The story of what happened before and after my encounter with Khalil Gibran's genius has already been told today, although of course,
It continues. For several months now, I've been willingly drinking the physician's remedy in my unemployment by riding an avalanche of painful memories containing unpleasant facts, experiences, and emotions, and am slowly but surely returning the headquarters of my mind to their stable state, becoming my complete self. This medicine has burnt my lips, but feeling the presence of wings in this beige cocoon as a result of gulping it all down has not. I ache all the time, but that's just me getting strong so as to fly.
We can't even find the back of our own mind.
Unfortunately, Joy's complaint accurately describes Western civilization and the world as a collective, for that matter. We're like Ronald Weasley in the Deathly Hallows Part 1, facing the apparitions of the Horcrux. Only we, unlike he, have yet to see through them. It's time we do. It's time we choose for the stresses of this age to be a gift we've been given to make the most out of, instead of a cubicle we cannot escape. It's time we work on what we have seen, drink the bitter potion of our sick selves, and breathe. It's time we stop betting against ourselves, realize that we are cursed only by our perceptions, which are often deceptions, and gaze not into the palantir without defenses. It's time we, like the Strider, coming in from the wilderness, equipped with tactics, strategies, discipline, wisdom, and experience, master the palantir.